today we have someone a little bit different who I'm sure is going to be super helpful. Her name is Talia Bombola, and she is a confidence and assertiveness specialist. So there's a lot of us out there who would like to think that we are confident. I see you, Talia. Let me get you on here. And could certainly use some hand out of family court. And boy, does it take a lot of courage to deal with exes like ours. So when I saw what Talia does, I was like, ooh, she'd be perfect to talk about being assertive. But before we even start and Talia introduced herself formally, could you just explain what is the difference between being assertive and being aggressive? Because I think we equate them in our head and people are like, I can't.
I could never. And I'm like, no, but you can. So yes, a great question. Being assertive is more so being sure of oneself and being able to advocate and stand up for oneself. And technically, I guess being aggressive is a way you could do that. So it's more of like a style than anything. They're both styles of communication, but being aggressive is more aggressive, obviously, and it's kind of disregarding how it's going to affect yourself, the other person. There's more of a nasty, sometimes demeanor to it, a ruthless demeanor, if you will, whereas being assertive is being ideally fair and being comfortable if somebody else has a different opinion for you to try to work on a compromise or a negotiation, or assertively say that won't work for me, let's go back to this topic, rather than aggressive is like try that again, there might be some like threats involved. So the goal is not to be aggressive, but a lot of people, like you said, think standing up for themselves is like, I'm going to be mean. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
then be mean, because your definition of mean is literally just advocating for yourself. Let's try it. And I'm like, that wasn't mean. I'm like, I can be mean. Trust me, because I teach all of the skills. Like, I can show you what mean can look like. They're like, no, that's worse. And I'm like, so as long as you're not doing that, then you're good to go.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, is it possible to be respectfully aggressive or is that just assertive?
I think that's where lawyers come into play. When you pick a lawyer, especially for this type of field, like in family law, there's more collaborative lawyers and there's more aggressive, like pit bull or shark lawyers, if you will. That's the case in most other law fields as well. I do believe that I emulate that, and others that I've worked with, you can be respectfully aggressive because it's more about like a fierce protection or a protection of a sense of justice, and you can become passionate about a certain topic and maybe your tone gets really emphatic, but you're not trying to make the other person feel afraid of you.
Mhm.
What you're trying to do is, in the description that you're giving, kind of that, like, it's more of like a passion and a fire of, this is the hill I would die on. And you can tell when somebody's being that kind of aggressive, like they're fighting for what they want, versus I'm going to make you suffer at the end of the day. That's not the goal with the
Yeah,
aggression.
yeah. Great point. So, Talia, can you officially introduce yourself now and tell us what you
Yes.
do and who you are?
So my name is Talia Bombola. I work as a licensed marriage family therapist. And like you mentioned, my specialization or niche is confidence and assertiveness. And I developed that many years ago because I noticed a lot of therapists were treating certain symptoms or certain diagnoses like anxiety or depression. And I'm like, well, I kind of treat those, but I think it's more the personality type or archetype that I'm treating. And that's when I realized, oh, those are the traits that I help people either cultivate more of, or to your point about the aggression, they have so much of it that we need to just dial it back just a scotch for them to be able to be heard by others and be experienced the way they want to be experienced. And I also work as a relationship coach. I've had 3 podcasts at this point. One of them we still have active episodes. I've been a professor, so I've done anything and everything you can imagine in the realm of mental health, and I've been through the family court system myself, so I have the personal experience also.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. Wonderful, awfully wonderful.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
with all of that, you know that people who are, well, our audience is exclusively people getting out
Yes.
of high conflict
Yes.
relationships and dealing with very difficult co-parents.
Yes.
So a lot of them tend to have people pleaser
Yep.
personalities, and they find
Yes.
it extraordinarily difficult to practice boundaries and to be confident. Where do you even start with someone coming from there? I mean, we have a hashtag, we call it from puddle to ninja. So where do you start when you
Ooh,
have a puddle?
like that.
Like,
I might start adopting that. I like that. So
yeah.
I would say the most effective place to start is where do you believe that you learned these behaviors?
Hmm.
And if the client or the person, if they're not working professional capacity, if the person's able to self-reflect and say, oh, I've always been this way,
Hmm.
okay, then you learned this from childhood. And what did it allow for in childhood? And what did it prevent you from actually growing into? So I want the person to understand and not shame this part of themselves or this way that they're being, because when we try to work to not get rid of it but retire it, as I like to say, where you're going to be a retired people pleaser and now you're going to be like a current assertive and confident person, when you're working on retiring one of your parts or a part of who you are, it doesn't want to feel like it's being cut out of you surgically. It wants to feel like it's being given a nice severance package and can go lay on the beach in Tahiti, metaphorically. So I want to understand where you learned it, how it was adaptive, how might now it might be maladaptive now, and I want to understand how that was kind of an underpinning of your current relationship. Is it chicken or the egg? Did you get into this relationship with a high conflict person because you have a fawn response? They overtook it from the beginning, or did it feel like they kind of pulled a 180, which does happen, where there's two very kind people, and then the person you marry or get in a relationship with or have a kid with is not always the person you divorce or are doing custody proceedings with or co-parenting with. You don't know that person as it relates to being out of a relationship with them. So there's a false belief, oh, they were so nice and kind. Yes, when they were getting things from you, when you loved them,
Yeah.
when you were doting on them, of course they're going to present differently. When they're not getting what they want, when it's expensive, when they're fighting you, when kids are involved, unfortunately it can become quite nasty and aggressive, because not both parents, when it's high conflict, my view and my research, not both parents have the best interest of the child at
No.
heart. One parent has the best interest of that parent at heart. The other parent has the best interest of the child at heart. Obviously, there's a subset where both have each of their own best interest at heart, not the child at all. But with the high conflict, it usually is, I want to do this for the kids, and the other parent's like, well, I don't care about that. It's going to be this way, or you'll do as I say, or I'm not going to let you see the kids. I've seen a variety of that. So I want to understand then more, that third step, what type of high conflict co-parent are you dealing with? And I have them read Bill Eddy's book, Biff.
Love. Yeah.
Phenomenal. The goat. I love
Yeah.
him. So anything by Bill Eddy, I have them read so I can better understand, okay, what are we actually dealing with? Is this overt narcissistic? Is this covert narcissistic? Is this just kind of somebody who's psychologically immature and never learned how to communicate properly? Are they someone who is really defensive and uses Darvo, but they wouldn't fit the criteria for a personality disorder? Because the thing about it is, somebody can have narcissistic traits, we all do, in fact, and not be diagnosed with that. And I know that's a very common term that's thrown around.
Oh yeah.
And yes, in high conflict, there are, most of the time, somebody does have, if not full blown, at minimum, the traits of NPD. However, if you have those narcissistic traits healthily integrated, that's ego. That's a healthy ego to lean on and go, I am worthy of standing up for myself. I'm worth this. I deserve to have my voice heard. I am going to fight for what's right. That's okay to do. But if you're with somebody who is more narcissistic, you fear becoming like them. So you don't want to emulate any of the behaviors they're engaging in. But the core of it is you're not going to, because the reason you're doing it is to protect yourself and have a healthy ego, not to make somebody else feel small or to use a child as a pawn. So the motive of the behavior makes a big difference from switching to being a people pleaser to being more assertive.
Yeah, and when you talk about Bill Eddy, we love him too. I was lucky enough to interview him, and we always recommend his book Splitting, because our clients
Yes.
are in the midst of or
Yes.
post
Yeah.
crazy divorce, and he's super
Yeah.
helpful.
Yes.
The other thing I was thinking about is something we talk about often, which is coercive control, and I think it's that when you part of that involves you inadvertently
Yeah.
handing over control to another person, and people
Yes.
think, well, we never fight, so that's healthy. And what you described, it goes through the
Yes.
divorce process as well. One person has control and there's no conflict because
Right.
of that. So
Yes.
we deal, Chris and I, my partner, deal with the person who has relinquished the control and is now trying to get something back and get themselves and their children through this process as healthy and unscathed as possible. But
Yes.
even just to recognize that just because things are peaceful, trying to keep the peace is not healthy,
No, and it could
because you're still,
start a
that
war. Yeah.
same power dynamic exists. And I know when I was going through my own divorce, my attorney's paralegal said that the dynamic in the relationship explodes 10 times when you get out, because they don't want to let go of that control.
And that's in fact why the relationship would have, I don't try to use this word because it sounds hyperbolic, but like it never would have
Mhm.
worked, because the reason why the high conflict, coercive control, power imbalance relationships start out this way and everybody's like, ooh, I like it, is because it gives you a chance to either emulate a role you enjoy or try on a new role you haven't yet.
Mhm.
And if I'm this person who's kind of subjugated my power and I think I'm equitable with this partner, the more I try to move it to equal, the more this person who has the control is like, but I don't want
Right.
that. Why would I want to give up control? So the more you push to go to couples therapy, to do all this stuff, it becomes weaponized because they do not have this goal. And that's where the bow breaks. And then you have all this high conflict. And anytime they perceive that you're getting a leg up, or you're making a fair point, or you're going to get something and put in one of your orders, your emotions, then they counter. So you're basically playing like a competitive chess clock back and forth, when in reality it's like everybody should be focused on, if you have kids, the best interest of the child, which laws vary state to state of like specific definitions. That's how you can start to counter that experience of coercive control. But the reason why that occurs is because I don't want an equitable relationship. So no amount of therapy, if you're listening to this and you're like, I worked with clients like that, I failed, I tried everything, myself as being a therapist having to go through that, I felt like an idiot because I'm like, how could I
Everybody.
not? It's
Yeah.
not a lack of skill
Yeah.
on my end, and this is the healthy ego. I Could I have left at different points? Sure, but I tried everything.
Mhm.
I did what I would have told a client to do, not knowing all the back end, because
Right.
our therapist didn't really like clock it at the time, despite me being like, are you not seeing this? Like, you just gaslit me in real time. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
So when you're in that experience, it's important not to shame yourself or blame yourself, because that adult logical part of you is not the one choosing to be in that power and balance relationship. It's your
Mhm.
subconscious part, it's your adaptive inner child. There's other ages of us that live inside that sometimes steal the driver's seat psychologically, because love and the experience of a romantic relationship is templated based off our parents.
Mhm.
Was my parent available or not? And if they weren't, am I going to constantly be chasing somebody unavailable? Do I like the bad boy or bad girl traits, being out of integrity or being in integrity, like, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do this instead? It gets real old when you're trying to have a collaborative relationship. So when you're thinking about how do I counter coercive control, if it's not about the child, and like if you're going through a high conflict divorce, this might not apply because you kind of have to talk, and I recommend not oversharing. But if you're going through high conflict co-parenting, you literally only, minus what your lawyer says, obviously I'm not a lawyer, but like as far as I've known and been informed, you only have to respond if it's about the child. If they're trying to give you threat, and you obviously can counter and say like, that's not true. There's One Mom's Battle is a great resource. If you type in like canned responses, she has a huge list to use against people who have narcissistic traits, so you can just copy and paste those responses, because you don't want to not respond and then the court can see it as you actually tacitly agreed. So there is an art form there of assertive communication. Can also be, I'm ending this conversation, you and I don't agree on that, those aren't the facts of the story, thanks for sharing your opinion, I don't agree with you. Things like that can be shared to stop the argument or the potential bait of an argument in its tracks, and then you don't keep engaging in the coercive control. And there's a way to language your paperwork, your declarations, your requests for orders. When you're thinking about assertive communication, the courts don't care about emotion. As hard as that is to hear, they're not proactive, they're reactive, and they do not care about your feelings. And it's not that if they had the time, they wouldn't. They're seeing maybe 10 to 20 to 30 some days cases before and after
Mhm.
lunch. They don't have time to read hundreds and hundreds of pages. So you have to be very clear using strategic language and assertive language. How is this impacting the child negatively, and how are these behaviors patterns? And that's going to be the key to help you combat the coercive control and highlight it. And Australia just passed laws that it's now a criminal offense
Yeah.
if they find you guilty of it. We're very behind here in America. So I would love it if we could catch up to that. But at a minimum, you can at least start advocating in your own case. And when you start to understand how the court system works and how your high conflict ex is thinking, you won't take the bait the way that you used to, and you won't fawn and have that fawn response of, oh, but if I don't say it, then they're going to get mad. Let them get mad in talking parents. I would love it for that to happen when I work with my clients, and I'm not trying to bait them into it, but that really doesn't look good for them in court. So let them dig their own grave. Like, ask them if they want a bigger shovel, basically, by being like, I'm not engaging in this. This isn't about the children. And they keep going. Let them. Put your phone down and let them, and then check once every 24 hours or whatever your court order says if you have more specific on reply times. But don't let it get in your head the way that it did, that probably delayed you leaving in the first or second place.
Yeah. So you said a lot about something that we teach more than anything, which we call strategic communication, and it's similar, but it's not quite the same. No
Right.
offense, but we are actually anti-canned language because
Okay.
it's so recognized, and a lot of abusers will use the
True.
same thing back, and you don't get anywhere.
Yes.
But we have a course called How to Communicate with Your Ex Without Destroying Your Case or Losing Your Mind. And one of the things we like to do, so you talked about how it really has to be about the child, but we know for one person, it's not
Yeah.
about the child, it's about
Yes.
themselves. And so negotiation has to be approached very differently. So in communication and in negotiation with people like that, we do a lot to recognize the imbalance of power and use it to our advantage. Like,
Yes.
if there are ways that you could make someone feel like they're winning, that's helpful rather than coming in with blame and accusations, to figure out something we call universal agreements.
Yep.
Like, what do we both have in
Mhm.
common? And always being conscious of that invisible audience. So one of the things we often focus on, because we belong to something called the Amicable Divorce Network, which is
Oh,
very child-centered,
yes.
focused on divorce, and we want to turn the conflict down. Sometimes using some of the canned language can be inflammatory to people who do have personality issues. So we want to like run and be like, we both want the same thing. Like,
Yes.
I'm sure both of us can agree how important it is to shield our kids from the conflict.
Yes.
Nobody is going to say in writing, I disagree. They're not going to do it. So you kind of anchor them
Yes.
in things that align with the court's
Yes.
values, rather than just being like cold with some of that canned language, because it's a little bit old. Like, again, no offense, but it's a little bit
It
old.
is.
So we have to do a lot more customized. And also, those kinds of personalities require certain things. And we often say, you've learned from being in that relationship how to survive. You know how to make them happy. And
Yes.
Chris and I were just talking about getting a been there, got out barf bag, because we often use a little barf bag
I
in
love it.
communication. It's like you play the role to get the goal. There's a
Yep.
lot of things that you can do,
Very true.
but it defies logic, and you don't approach it the way you would a normal person,
Yes.
because they don't care about the same things that you do. And sorry, I'm interviewing you, but
No,
doing
no.
all the talking.
No, this is, I think that's so helpful to bring up, and I'm so glad that you brought up the inflammatory risk of canned responses, and it gives a good not segue, but like alternative, that when I'm dealing with somebody who, and maybe I'm sure you deal with this too, when they're a people pleaser, even seeing some of those responses, not that I encourage them to use all of them, but they're like, wait, I'm allowed to not have to explain
Yeah.
myself or verify my location or whatever. I'm like, yes. So we often use those, not, especially with high conflict, not explicitly, but there are some times where, to your point of like, I've seen two co-parents that I've worked with where they did reply and they were like, I don't care about the best interest of the child. I'm like, you just said that in our okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, your case just got handed to you. So like, obviously that's an hopefully, but not hopefully, for the case sake, hopefully that's not going to happen
We
that
call that
common. Yeah.
usefully awful.
Yes, yes. It's usefully awful, very good terminology, and using the template of, you don't have to explain everything. You can have this be the base part of the response, and then we'll work on some fluff from there. So if your goal, if you could pick it from the list and go, here's what I would want to convey to them, great, let's use that. Then we mix it in with assertiveness skills. I have basic and advanced that I give the clients that I'm working with, depending on their skill level and the difficulty level of the person. And then we take that response and mash it up and put it through trained assertive language, just like you're describing. So the message is what the response says, without the risk, hopefully, we can never tell for sure, of that inflammatory response. Because there's sometimes, I read it when I was first researching that and I'm like, this would have the opposite effect. Like,
Right.
this might work on somebody who doesn't have high conflict, but you wouldn't usually
Exactly.
need to
Exactly.
use those with somebody who doesn't have high conflict. So it was very counter. So I'm really appreciative you brought that up, because it allows us to have a deeper a deeper understanding that for high conflict, those responses in and of themselves are going to be inflammatory,
They
but you
are.
can
They
use
are.
them as a base or an understanding of, if I could have it my way, which it's not the case,
Mhm.
What would I want to convey? Would I want the accusations to stop? Would I want this? And then framing in how you said, this conflict is, it's not the best. I know we both want what is best for our child, especially in writing, unless you're the two people that I have as a case example. Most of the time people either just stop responding or they go,
Mhm.
okay, yeah, you're right, or I agree, or because they know it could show up in court. Always text like you're going to court. That's
Yeah.
step one in any of this. Like, always assume that a judge is going to be reading your conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So say like I find that doing strategic communication is one of the best ways to start healing. And that involves learning how to be assertive even when you're
Yes.
quiet, when you're quietly being assertive. Like sometimes our clients often get like walls of angry text, and we love to say, okay, just this vague thing and then focus on something else. And they're like, but what about all this? It doesn't matter. And if we stay vague, it confuses them. We want to confuse them. Sometimes we'll say, great, I agree. And to something that's so vague that it doesn't matter. And it just shuts the other person down because they don't know what to do. We always say they want your
Mhm.
attention. They like your negative attention more than your positive attention because they can see
Yes.
that they can still get under your skin.
Yes. And if you can stop them from actually getting under your skin, and that's where therapy can be
Yes.
helpful to learn to rewire your nervous system, to have a place to vent about it, like strategic timing, where it's like, okay, I'm only gonna, if your order says something different, don't listen to this. But if you don't have an order on how often you have to communicate, you can check once a day, or have somebody else be your go-between for communication. Obviously there's like paid or unpaid services for that, but you can learn to rewire your nervous system. But I read a quote the other day that is so painfully accurate, that domestic violence are the only people who are victims of crime who have to communicate on a weekly or sometimes daily instance with their abuser, and are gauged by how nice they are when they're doing it.
Yep.
And it's messed
Yep.
up because no other, like in any other breakup situation or any other crime, you just can leave. I mean, not that it doesn't affect you, but like you don't have to deal with them on an ongoing basis till your child is out of the system or that parent passes on. Is really, to be morbid, but like those are the only two timelines where you're not going to have to deal with it anymore in a direct way. So if you can learn to not get as activated and understand, this was a pattern, I am having a normal response, but I can work on healing myself internally. I can take deep breaths. I can set my phone down and walk away. Not everything needs an immediate reply. And coming back to it when you have more of yourself available and you aren't coming from an activated part or an angry part of yourself or a wounded inner child trying to prove your worth. You want to respond as an adult, and you only want to respond to what you need to respond to, and not, like you're saying, not dig yourself a hole by not replying. And then the judge can go, oh, well, you didn't respond to that, so we assumed it was an agreement. And this is where that assertive language with strategic language, kind of blending them. So strategic assertive language would look like, let me scan it. Nope, nothing is about the kid, this and that. That's all. Okay, all right, I'm not going to respond. Or, okay, thanks for letting me know your opinion, is one of the things that, depending on your case, if you do have a response requirement time, that I've seen some paralegals or lawyers be like, that's a pretty neutral, not as incitatory response, where it won't say that you agreed, but it also won't say that you didn't respond in whatever amount of time. So
Yeah.
there's an art form, I'm sure
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
see
Like I
this
was
too. There's an
just
art
saying
form
that
to it.
we like to do as few words as possible, almost like a game show. So I'd be
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
gotcha. That's it.
Noted. So
And
noted. Yes.
we also try to really limit I and you statements
Yes.
because that's inflammatory for certain people in its own way. Because we say every
Very
time
true.
you say I, every time you offer an opinion or a suggestion, they're taking it as that you're trying to control them and tell them what to do.
It's
So we got a
so
question, I
fun
think,
dealing with it.
yeah,
Yeah. So true.
that I think is excellent. Does it make sense to go to court mediation with a narcissist? I say yes, but I want to, and there's a lot
Yeah.
more to it, but I want to hear what you have
Um,
to say about that.
if it's ordered, you don't really have a choice.
Mhm.
So you have to, like, whether it's making sense or not, you kind of have to go, depending, if, unless you have domestic violence, or they don't require you to go, at least the county that I'm in, that is a necessary step, because the court would like you to settle it out of court. They do not
Totally.
want to actually have to get overly involved or involved at all, ideally. So they're sometimes already irritated that it got to that point. But
Mhm.
it does make sense to go, that you're showing moderate participation, but your expectations around it have to, in my opinion, have to be different than if you were going to mediation with somebody, which you probably would end up at that anyway. You would have started with mediation and avoided the divorce process entirely in terms of having to hire attorneys. So when you're participating in that, being understanding that what is the role of the mediator? Are you in a county where it's confidential or not? Is it recommending or not? There's going to be a need for you to educate yourself on the process of mediation. And if you're pro se, or if you have a lawyer, if you're pro se, you have to do more research. If you have a lawyer, they can not coach you, but they will work with you to help you understand what that process is actually like, because it is different than hiring a private mediator.
Yeah.
I would love to know
Um,
your thoughts on that.
yeah. So I think it depends, but from interviewing a variety of mediators for our podcast as well, um, one of them made a really important thing. So for us, we want to always put a fence around legal abuse. That's our specialty, where someone basically weaponizes the court
Yes.
system to wear our clients down and bleed them dry.
Yeah.
So when you're a domestic violence victim and people are saying it's domestic violence, you can't do mediation, your only option is litigation, which is way more expensive, and you give all of your power
Yeah.
away. And
Yeah.
so there's ways to not, even before official mediation with the other person, there's strategic communication, which we call strategic negotiation. There's a lot of things that you can do, because when you do it, things outside of court, you're always going to get a better parenting plan. It's more customized. That
True.
is so important, because that's the law you
Yep.
live by. If you go to court, if some people don't have a choice, but if you have to, and you don't come in with already knowing what it is that you're looking for, you're leaving it up to a judge who doesn't know you or your family, doesn't care, and basically has a template
Yep.
of plans that they'll just hand over to you, and you're going to be back in court constantly, because it's going to have all kinds of vague language and
True.
loopholes
True.
that you're actually
True.
going to take advantage of. So it's always better to do it outside of court. It is not easy. I think sometimes people think that if they can just go once and it doesn't work, then it's a failure. But for us, we say it's a process and it can take time. We like to do short bites of no more than 2 hours, so you don't get too
Right.
exhausted. But that's a whole other conversation. But I do think that mediation is helpful to at least try, because even if you can't get everything done, the more you get done outside of court, the happier the judge is going to be. Because like you
Yes.
said, they'll see that you tried.
Yes. And if you I have seen it where if you have a template that you've been working from privately, even if
Mm-hmm.
you never submitted it with the court, but the two of you, well, mostly one,
Yeah.
but typically, ideally, the two of you have been following it, or you have some semblance of a signed agreement, or here's the plan we've been working on. I have seen it. I don't know if you have, but where some judges or some lawyers be, okay, great, that's our
Yep.
base. Like, instead of one of the
Absolutely.
templates I'm going to use, if you've been able to work out some semblance of something, this is our starting point, and then you can go negotiate further from here. So there is still, like you're saying, a great benefit if you're able to try to work something out between the two of you, whether you have representation or not. And if you do, try to have them stipulate rather than having it go to trial. So if you can agree, even if you're not going to get 100% of what you want, be clear on what you're not willing to sacrifice. And for a cookie cutter parenting plan, like you said, that has a lot of loopholes, I know a lot of the moms I work with, they're not willing to put up with that because they don't want to have to be facing their abuser consistently, or the person that they just don't like to be around consistently. So they're more willing to, maybe it's not as much on the finance side. They're not as concerned about the money, but they want the parenting side. So know what you're willing to and not willing to negotiate on can also help while you're going into mediation, whether or not it's court ordered, especially if it's court ordered. And if you're staunch on something, don't let somebody bully you into a different decision, is something that I work on with my clients. Obviously, being a therapist, I'm all about them advocating for themselves and having that confidence. If you know in your heart of hearts and your intuition, which can only get you so far in court, you have to know strategic communication to language it and convey. If you know that it is in the best, truly in the best interest of the child for them to have a certain parenting time or custody schedule or whatever, working on language to go to bat for that, and being willing to give on some of the other stuff, like the amount of time that it takes to give a heads up on travel, for example. Like, I've seen couples where they're able to negotiate because they're kind of each getting a little bit of what they want. And
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying, knowing how to word it where we both win in some ways, but not one person's going to be the entire victor, because that's not, it's a child. Like, we're talking about children's lives and livelihoods. There's no winning or losing. And if there were, technically we're all losing
Yeah.
because we got in this situation, unfortunately, whether it was our contribution or not. It's about the kids. It's their psyche that makes a big difference. And I sit across from adults all day who were those kids, and I know the impact of that. So it's an especially close part to my heart working with that. If I can try and help prevent that, I would like to, when I can do some co-parenting counseling.
Yeah. And so what you're talking about too, like, I don't think you know this, Talia, but I spent 10 years in the legal system and I represented myself for 7 years through about 100 court appearances. And then
Girl.
my case was made into case law on the appellate level. Yeah. So it's the first
Whoa.
ever for pro se. So I always say I'm super
Oh
proud of
yeah.
that. But
Yes.
in that education in the trenches, I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned and was successful at was judges want you to do their job for them if
Yes.
possible. So when you come in with a parenting plan that you really considered that seems
Yes.
fair and reasonable, it's so much easier than having them come up
Yes.
with something. So usually, especially with our pro se clients, we'll say, you want to go in there with the idea of like, here's what I'm asking for,
Mm-hmm.
and here's why my children are entitled
Yes.
to it, for example. So you really need to organize things and make sure that what you're asking for aligns with the court. But if you come in and present well and have done your research and have shown that you've really tried to work with your co-parent and that it's impossible, I mean, I've had a judge write twice my suggestions right into orders, and my ex hated it, and so did his attorney, but made her job easier.
That's
So
was
there's a
my
lot
case
of things you
too.
can
Yeah.
do, yeah, especially with parenting plans. But like you said, it involves a lot of work. That's something that's actually the next course that we're releasing. It's on how to write airtight parallel parenting plans. But yeah, it's really, really important to understand the things that you can give and that you can, and there's a lot of games to play in mediation, but again, it's back to playing that role. and
Mhm.
um and for us, sometimes that involves not two people looking like they're winning, but one person acting like they're suffering
Yes.
so that the other person feels like they
Totally.
can win, because sometimes you can go farther
Yes.
that way, and that's part of the whole
Yes.
strategy.
Yes, and like you're saying, it's I've heard it on another podcast as well. What's her name? Tammy from Divorce University Online. She talks a lot about that it's a game, and I agree, but it's not a game in the sense that it's like a fun haha. It's like
No.
it involves strategy.
Right.
There are rules. There are certain unspoken rules. Even when you go sit, something I do recommend for people is if you unfortunately have to go to court, before you actually have to go to court for yourself, to go sit in court and understand what that feels like, to drive there, to park, to go in. If it's Zoom, it's
Mhm.
different, but like go see what your judge, if you have a judge assigned, what are they looking for, what are they wanting, how do they look at other cases, how are they describing it, how do both sides present on certain cases, so you have familiarity with it. The same way when I'm counseling or I guess supervising would be the better word, my associates who work under my license, I tell them, like, drive to the testing center when you're taking your board exams. Like, go drive there, park, see what it's like, go at the same time so you know what the traffic's going to be like. That familiarity and that memorization almost of what that process is like will already tamp down your nerves so you can feel more confident and feel more assertive. And same thing with the parenting plan. When I was putting mine together, what a nightmare.
Yeah.
Of course, it's the person who does all the paperwork and everything else in the marriage that's doing all the paperwork afterwards as
Oh.
well. We often see that, the overfunctioner. And I met with 5 different lawyers hourly just to get different opinions for all their specializations. And one of them gave me solid, I think, very solid advice. If you write something in there, be willing to also be held accountable to the same rule. Because
Always,
sometimes people
always.
write in, they're not maybe consciously intending it, but they have negative feelings, understandably, towards the person they're divorcing. And so they feel like, oh, well, this will stick it to them. I'm like, we're not going to be punitive to that parent if they have a substance use problem. If there is something where only one parent has to follow the rule, also be prepared to have
That's
evidence to support
what I was
why.
gonna say. Like, if
Yes,
it's one way,
yes,
you need to make a
you need to have
persuasive,
strong
compelling
evidence
case.
as to why. And then if it is both ways, be prepared to, yeah, that might be a sacrifice. Maybe the travel thing is, I need to write this isn't the case, but just for example's sake, like a 2-page written itinerary that's due 2 weeks before. And maybe I hate writing itineraries, but I'm willing to do it because I know it would help me feel safe if the other parent did. Like,
Mhm.
again, a throwaway example, but be willing to do what you're asking the other parent to do. And if you are only writing a one-way rule, have very sound and strong evidence as to why you would not have to abide by it. But with the substance use thing, if you don't have a substance use problem, and I don't think the judge would necessarily, you would know more than I would on this. If they're like, okay, then you follow it too, I'd be like, okay, like anything is worth sacrificing for my child when it comes to that. So if they were like, you can't have the champagne toast at your friend's wedding, which is probably the one time a year that I'll indulge, okay, like I will gladly say no to that. You want me to submit for this? I'll do a drug test. I have nothing to hide. So if you write that, be prepared to follow it to a T and not try to nitpick and create a list, because you also don't want to be the person who's filing unnecessary motions. And to your point, having the judge have to do their job too much, and they're like, okay, can you please work this out outside of my
Right.
office? Like, wait till you have enough to go back to be like, this has been the last however many occurrences or months, we need to change this, not just they violated the order once, I want it changed.
Right. Could be. Yeah, we actually just met with someone yesterday who was talking about going back really quickly
Yeah.
after an agreement, which is stronger than a court order because the two of you said you would agree
Yes.
to it. And now you're
Yes.
asking a third party to change it. And we felt her case wasn't strong enough. And she was not willing to consider the option of waiting longer before going back. But if you keep going back with a weak
Yeah.
case, no one's going to pay attention to you when you
True.
really need it. So that's part of strategy too. And we also met with someone yesterday who was the opposite. She said, I don't have anything coming up for the next couple of years, but I'm playing the long game. And I was like, I
Yep.
love working with people like that are really good planners too. I mean, clearly most people don't meet us when they don't have something going on. They come in crisis mode,
Yes.
but
Yes.
it is really good if you can understand how to play that long game and what you need to do to make a really powerful
Yeah, it's
case rather
a
than just
marathon, not a sprint. And it's so counter to, obviously nothing is the same as media. I know that in any case, but especially that there's no, I file and the next day, and it can take weeks, months, it can get postponed. So you have to have that patience, and ideally have a therapist or a coach or a
or
mentor,
both,
have somebody with you, or but all of it. If
right?
you
You
can do
need
all of it, do
a
all of
team.
it.
You definitely need
Yes,
a team to get through this.
have, it's better to be over resourced in that sense than under resourced, and have somebody who can be with you. And I have three therapists. I see a parenting therapist. Whether or not the other person shows up, I'm committed to that because I know it's very important for my child. I
Mhm.
see a therapist for attachment based EMDR to work on reprocessing traumatic memories, and then I see a psychoanalyst who helps me understand what was it about my core and my upbringing and my psyche that led to all of this even unfolding in the first place. And sometimes they see her 2 times a week. So I'm like incredibly well resourced on that end as well, because it is a long game and you don't want to lose the one thing that's going to keep you in it, which is your mind. And you
Mhm.
mentioned earlier, it's like without losing your mind or going crazy, it can feel like you're going crazy because you are not about morality in the right, but you're like, no, I literally have the plan I've been following. Like, is nobody else seeing this? And it can help you to not feel like you're losing your mind, to have the mental health, to have the legal help, and to have a friends who can be there for you if you're to look, I just need to vent. I don't want advice. I don't necessarily need strategy or anything. I just want to complain about how frustrating this is that I have to wait another month or whatever because something got postponed or something got misfiled. Oh, how frustrating. Being able to have a full team of resources really helps for that marathon, just as though you were running a real marathon. You're not going to wake up one day and run 30 miles. That would be wild. Like, you'd have to be in survival mode for that to go well. You're going to train for a marathon. You can have these people help you along the marathon that is custody and divorce for many people.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to plug my book, but what you just described is the subtitle of our first book.
Yes.
It's How to Stay Sane Under
Yep.
Insane
Yep.
Circumstances. 'Cause
There it
you
is.
can't lose your mind. And we talk about having support, and it's like a table and all of that. But
Yes. Yes.
anyway, but completely agree. So also, but let's get back instead of like this has been a great conversation with us, but I also want people to get some
Yes.
tips about how to start becoming assertive
Yes.
when they're dealing with someone like this, because there has been that power dynamic for so long. And you said that earlier that you start with trying to get people to self-reflect on how they got here.
Mhm.
So once they do that, then what? Like what could be
So
helpful?
what can be helpful once they've reflected on it is being, I don't want to say hyper aware, implying that they need to be like paranoid, but being extra aware of when those younger parts of yourself or those family upbringing dynamics are playing out or are being triggered, meaning
Mhm.
activated in whatever conversation you're having. And this happens in psychoanalysis. It's called, an example of it is called projective identification. It's a
Mhm.
defense mechanism. So let's say you and I are in a relationship and we're having a fight, and you say something that reminds me of what my mom said when I was
Mhm.
growing up. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing you as like a hologram basically of my mom. I'm not seeing you as you. And I'm responding to how I would have if you were my mom. I'm not responding to how I would if you were my partner. This
Mhm.
occurs, this projective identification can occur in the process of splitting and doing splitting up with your partner and doing custody or doing divorce, because they're triggering you, they're activating you, they're behaving in a way you've never seen them behave, and your brain is going, what the heck is this? Maybe I feared them turning into this, and I knew they were going to turn into this, and that's why I chose not to leave for so long, and now I have to, pay the piper. I'm facing this, and this is the reality. And your body is going to have certain responses, either to get pulled back from childhood or traumatic or abusive times in the relationship. Being able to stay grounded in your adult body and taking a breath before you respond, or asking yourself, how old do I feel right now? Who
That's
am
great.
I right now? Am I my adult self? Do I feel like I'm confident, I have agency, even if I'm scared shitless? I can be assertive and follow the scripts and I can send you some to give out if you
Yeah.
want to, or to
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the
For
episode of
sure.
like basic and advanced interpersonal effectiveness, which is a skill that I think most people in general don't learn how to do, because we do grow up with a more passive or people pleasing society. And then, depending on your gender, if you're assertive, you're either lauded for it or you're called the B word. So there's
Mhm.
another level to this. If you're a woman going through the court system and trying to negotiate this, getting over the biases or getting over people seeing you in a negative light or potentially having judgments about you being assertive. Like, I'm not everybody's cup of whiskey, and I say that on purpose because I can be abrasive if I need to be, right? You're saying earlier, like, if I'm going to be passionately aggressive to defend what I feel like is right, my goal is not to, though I could, knowing all the therapy skills, my goal is not to make the other person feel small. My goal is to be heard in a way that's not going to hurt the other person.
Mhm.
So asking yourself, am I coming from being a people pleaser? Is this a trauma response? How old do I feel right now? Then using very specific scripts, very specific skills until they become rote memory, literally as though you're learning a new language,
Mhm.
because you are. If you want to learn
Yeah.
Spanish, you need to practice it on a daily basis and with others and in different contexts and in writing and reading and listening for the full immersion experience. Very similar with learning all of these assertive communication techniques, especially when it applies to high conflict co-parenting. So if you're seeped in this, you'll be listening to this podcast, you'll be listening to other podcasts, you'll be following people on Instagram, reading different books. I want you to be immersed in this language, and that will start to change those subliminal messages you'll get. So the questions you'll have to ask yourself, how old do I feel? Sometimes I've had clients be like, I'm my 60-year-old self in the future, being so proud of myself for doing it. So
Yeah.
it's not always a negative thing that they feel like a little kid. Sometimes they feel like an even older, wiser version of themselves, guiding them through that assertive communication and knowing your language, not only the strategic language, knowing your language of, your partner, ex-partner, co-parent, whatever, better than anyone,
We say the
sometimes even better than
same thing.
themselves.
Yep.
So it's very important that you understand, and I've seen this personally, where it's like certain scripts or techniques, I see it used back, and I'm like, except you're missing the core point of the principle
Right.
of it, so it's not applied well. And I'm like, I know what you're doing, I'm not going to engage in it. Knowing when not to respond is also the art of language as well. Not everything needs a response either. Maybe it needs it written, but it doesn't need a response from your nervous system internally.
Right.
And that's another way to stay assertive and stay confident is, I know I have to respond to this, or I radically accept I have to deal with this until my child is out of the
Mhm.
system. I don't have to get worked up. It takes practice and years. I don't have to get worked up every time. And you can note to yourself, wow, that used to be my undoing and send me into a spiral where I wouldn't eat all day and my nervous system would be so shot. And now I get kind of annoyed, or I'm like, here we go again, and then I move on. So the more you can build your tolerance and expand your window of tolerance around the distress that the communication causes, and rely heavily on those skills in your support system, you will fawn less and you will become less of a people pleaser when you face that fear that, as long as you're following the rules and the laws, it's not going to be a negative outcome ideally, right? There's a big caveat there because the system has its own pros and cons. But if you're holding yourself accountable, you're being true to yourself, you're following the parenting plan, you're reading the books, you're listening to the podcast, it is more rare than common that you will have a misstep intentionally because you're trying to be on that good path, good meaning like the best fit for you. You're following that guiding light, and you're going based off of seasoned advice and resources, not just fear or, oh my gosh, what if I don't do this? Is probably not a good place to make a decision based off of. It's okay, what will happen when I do this? So less
Yeah.
decisions out of anxiety, more decisions out of
Right.
confidence.
Right. And also acknowledging like it's normal to feel
Totally.
these horrible
Yes.
feelings and be terrified and to be illogical yourself
Yes.
and unreasonable and to get it out, but not to your
Correct.
ex.
They are not, and that's the one of the hardest. Ugh, I remember I can even close my eyes and go back to that liminal space when you're separating,
Yeah.
not legal separation, but like you're detaching is a better word from your ex. They're becoming whoever they really have been all along, and you're having to
Right.
face reality and come to terms with that. You have to evolve into a different version of yourself that can't rely on them. It's the worst pain. I told my therapist this. It's the worst when the one person you thought who may never hurt you hurts you in the ways and that are worse than anybody who ever has hurt you ever has. Like
Yeah.
it's this most painful experience to watch somebody you took vows with and stood across from in front of your loved ones and friends and family or at the courthouse try to ruin your life.
Right.
It is so
Yeah,
counter to your
right.
psychology. Yeah.
I just keep, as you were saying, I kept thinking
Yeah.
betrayal, betrayal,
Oh
betrayal.
yes. Going to therapy to work on the feelings of betrayal and understanding, keeping, as hard as it is, and I know I went through this too, keeping the communication child centered, you are not going to get that response that you want from your partner. You're not going to get an apology. You're not going to get, oh my God, I'm so sorry I blew up
Mhm.
our family. Oh my God, what was I thinking having an affair? I'm sorry my drinking ruined our life. You're not going to get that. And even if you
The
do, it's not going to
safety.
undo the past. It's not going to
Right.
change the future because you still have to go through the system. And the system
Mhm.
has its own flaws. Any system does, and there are some wins that come along with it. But you have to get over the betrayal separately and not go to your ex, which is what our brains usually go to. If I have a partner and I have a tough day, I can go to them. At one point was true, is not any longer the case. So you
Mhm.
have to update your internal reality to not, I'm not saying see them as an enemy and treat them that way, but you have to detach and unplug this person from the like partner marriage role position in your mind and imagine they're just like teetering off the wedding cake, right? Their little
Yeah.
figurine has
Yeah.
just fallen off down to the
Right.
bottom
They're not
and it's just you.
your ally anymore.
They're not your ally anymore, and they could potentially use all the times or disclosures while you were their ally against you. So trying to stay not paranoid, but trying to stay strategic, and that's where having counseling, and friends who can help you keep your wits about you is going to help you play the long game and be strategic. They're not your ally anymore. The betrayal hurts worse than you ever imagined because you had a child, you created a new life with this person. You have to raise that life separately. No one
Mhm.
intends to have a child that way. Those are the brutal realities of it. And the sooner you are able to accept it, not like it, but accept it, radical acceptance. This is what it is, and I have to work through this. The emotions get tended to separately and they don't come out sideways in the communication or at your ex during pickups or exchanges or drop offs of crying and weepiness. They do not care.
Yeah.
Imagine them as like a Navy SEAL. They don't care how
They
much you
actually
complain or
like
cry.
it.
They
They
like
like
it.
it.
Yeah. So the
So
more you're
you're
just
feeding them.
neutral, yeah, you're neutral. I don't care what you think about me because I don't think about you at all. I don't care. If I didn't
Mhm.
have to talk to you, I wouldn't. Like that's the ego level I want people to get to. And it's not to sound like haughty or
No,
ostentatious,
it's
but it's true. Many of
detached.
us, if we never had to talk to our ex or co-parent again, we would probably choose that option.
Right.
Like, yeah,
Right.
especially in high conflict.
Oh, I
Yeah.
know. I know.
Yeah.
So Talia, I mean, this is awesome. I feel like we need to keep talking, not
Yes.
now, but
Yes.
but tell people how they can find you.
Yeah. So I'm most active on Instagram here at Talia Bombola. I forget what the name of it is. I'm on other platforms, but I'm not as active because I use a little website that helps me post my videos to
Yeah.
everywhere because I just don't have the time as a single mom to
Yeah.
be doing what I used to do, running my business. I'm most active on Instagram, and then I have my podcasts are listed in my link in bio on my Instagram. My coaching website is taliabombola.com. And then my therapy website, you have to be a resident of California, is therapywithtalia.com.
Great. Wow. So helpful. And I love talking to mental health professionals who really do get it, because many of them don't. And we've done lunch and learns to actually school
Yes.
therapists on coercive control and the nature of clients who are dealing with legal abuse. So
Yes.
it's usefully
Yeah.
awful that you experienced it yourself, but
It's a
really good to know.
blessing. It's a blessing in disguise. Would have not
Yep,
picked to go. I would have loved to read a book about it, not lived it, and had to write a book about it. But life happens. Yeah. If you ever want to do another episode, I'm happy to. But there is
I
such an
do.
important.
I
Yeah,
do.
there's such an important note on that with the thinking that couples therapy or therapy is going to change the high conflict person or the abuser, and it's not. The very vulnerability actually gets weaponized. So that I think could be, if you haven't done an episode on that,
We
that's a topic I'm
will
very
do that.
passionate about as
We'll
well.
set a date as soon as we get off.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Talia. This is really, really helpful.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time.
My pleasure. All right. We'll talk soon and set another
Okay.
date. Okay.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.